I found out. My boyfriend was planning a future with my coworker, while I was busy building one with him, and I never said a single word to either of them. I want to start by saying I am not the kind of person who snoops. I never went through his phone. I never checked his location. I never asked where he was when he came home late because I trusted him completely, and I thought that trust was something we had built together over 4 years. I thought we were solid. I thought what we had was real. His name is Daniel. We met at a work event, not my job, his. I was there with a friend who had dragged me along because she did not want to go alone. Daniel walked over with 2 drinks, handed one to my friend and one to me, and said something that made us both laugh. By the end of the night, my friend was telling me to go talk to him. By the end of the following week, we had our first date. By the end of that year, we had moved in together. 4 years. That is not a short amount of time. That is grocery runs together and learning how he takes his coffee and fighting about whose turn it is to call the landlord, and making up after and falling asleep with your legs tangled together. That is real life. That is not a situationship or something casual. That was my actual life and I was happy in it. Or I thought I was. I started my current job about 2 years into our relationship. It is a mid-sized company, nothing glamorous, but the team was good and I settled in fast. There was a woman there named Priya. She sat 2 desks away from me, and on my first week she brought me coffee without me asking, and showed me which printer actually worked and warned me about the Thursday afternoon meetings that always ran long. I liked her immediately. We started having lunch together a few times a week. She became what I would genuinely call a work friend, maybe even edging toward a real friend. She knew about Daniel. I talked about him the way you talk about someone you love, casually and often, just weaving them into conversation because they are part of your everyday life. She knew we had been together 4 years. She knew we lived together. She asked about him sometimes. Normal questions. How is Daniel? Did you guys do anything fun this weekend? Is he still doing that project he mentioned? I never thought anything of it. The thing that started everything was so small I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday, and I had stayed late to finish something, and I was the last one on our floor except for the cleaning crew. I went to grab my jacket from the break room, and I heard my phone buzz on my desk with a notification from our shared calendar app. Daniel and I used it to keep track of things, appointments, plans, reminders. I walked back over and glanced at my screen. He had added an event, dinner reservation, the name of the restaurant, and a time, and then in the notes section just 2 words. For us. I thought nothing of it. I smiled, actually. I thought he was planning something for us. Maybe an anniversary thing. Maybe just a nice night out. I went home and I did not mention it because I figured he wanted it to be a surprise. He came home that night and he was normal. Made dinner, asked about my day. We watched something on television. I remember thinking how much I loved the ordinary parts of being with him. How comfortable it felt. 3 days later, I was clearing some old emails from a folder I barely used, and I saw something that stopped me cold. It was a confirmation email for that same restaurant. Same date, same time. It had been forwarded to our shared email account by mistake, I think, because it was the kind of forward that happens when you hit the wrong button. The reservation was not under Daniel's name. It was under Priya's. I sat there staring at my screen for a long time. My brain was doing that thing where it offers you every possible explanation before it lets you land on the obvious one. Maybe they were just colleagues catching up. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe there was something completely innocent going on that I was about to blow out of proportion. But the notes section in the calendar had said for us. And I knew, in the way that you know things you do not want to know, that us did not mean me. I closed my laptop. I went to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at the table we had picked out together at a secondhand shop, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do next. I did not cry. Not yet. I was too busy thinking. And what I decided that night would change everything. Not just for me, but for both of them. I want to be clear about something. The version of me that sat at that kitchen table that night was not the version of me that would have existed a few years ago. Younger me would have grabbed her phone and called him immediately. Would have been shaking and crying and demanding answers before she even had the full picture. I have seen that version of myself before, and she does not come out of those situations well. But I had grown. Quietly, without making a big announcement about it, I had become someone who knew how to be still when everything inside her wanted to move. So I sat there, I drank my tea, and I made a decision to do absolutely nothing until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Daniel came to bed around 11. He kissed my forehead the way he always did. I said goodnight the way I always did. I lay in the dark next to him, and I felt the strange calm of someone who has already decided to be patient. It is a different kind of calm from the kind you feel when everything is fine. It is cooler, more deliberate. I recognized it, and I let it settle over me. The next morning, I went to work, and I watched Priya the way you watch something when you are finally paying real attention. She was the same as always. Warm, easy to talk to, laughed at the right moments. She asked how my evening was. I told her quiet, just a night in. She nodded and told me she had been home all night too, tired from the week. I smiled and said same and moved on. She had not been home. Or if she had been on the phone with him because I had checked. I had looked at the one thing I had access to without touching his phone, our shared cell phone plan. We had been on the same plan for 2 years because it was cheaper, and it had seemed like such a reasonable, practical couple thing to do at the time. I had logged into the account that morning before work, and I had looked at the call log for the past 30 days. Her number appeared 14 times. Some of the calls were short, a few minutes, but 3 of them were over an hour, and all 3 happened on evenings when Daniel had told me he was on a work call or running late. I did not feel rage. I want to describe what I felt, and the closest I can get is something like grief arriving before the loss. Like when someone is sick and you start preparing yourself before they are gone. A pre-mourning. I was grieving something I was still technically living inside of. I kept going to work. I kept having lunch with Priya. I kept coming home to Daniel. And I kept collecting information. I am a naturally organized person. I have always been the one in my friend group who remembers things, who keeps receipts, who notices details. It is not something I do deliberately, it is just how my brain works. And now that skill was working overtime. I started a private folder on an old email account Daniel did not know about. Screenshots of the calendar. Dates cross-referenced with phone records. A note in my phone that I updated every few days. Not because I was planning something dramatic, but because I needed to understand the full shape of what was happening before I decided what to do about it. 2 weeks after the restaurant email, I found the next piece. Daniel had left his laptop open on the coffee table and gone to take a shower. I was not snooping. I was walking past, but the screen was on and there was a message visible, just the preview, and I saw her name and I saw enough of the words to understand that this was not new. This was not a beginning. Whatever this was had been going on for a while. I walked to our bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I stared at the wall. 1 year. From what I could piece together, this had been going on for close to 1 year. The whole time I had been bringing Priya coffee back from the cafe downstairs and telling her about the vacation Daniel and I were thinking about and asking her opinion on what to get him for his birthday. She had already known him in a way I was not supposed to find out about. The shower turned off. I heard him moving around in the bathroom. I stood up, smoothed the bed, and went back to the living room. When he came out, I was on the couch with a book, and everything about me looked completely normal. But I had already started making moves he would not see coming until it was far too late. People ask when they hear stories like this, why did you not just leave? And I understand the question. I do. But I think it comes from someone who has never been in the middle of something like this, where leaving is obvious in theory and completely complicated in reality. We shared an apartment. Our names were both on the lease. Our finances were not completely merged, but they were tangled enough that walking out the door with a suitcase would have created chaos I was not ready to manage. More than that, I was not done finding out what I needed to know. There is a particular kind of anger that does not burn hot. It burns low and steady and it keeps you focused. That was what I had. I was not going to blow this up before I was ready. I was going to be ready first. I called my older sister. She was the only person I told. I called her from my car, parked down the street from our apartment, and I told her everything in one long, unbroken stream, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" I told her I needed her to help me think. She did not tell me to confront him. She did not tell me to forgive him. She did not tell me what to do at all, which is exactly why I called her. She just helped me lay out my options like items on a table and look at them clearly. Option 1 was to confront them both and let it be messy and public and painful. Option 2 was to leave quietly and without explanation and let them wander. Option 3 was to wait, gather everything, and exit on my own terms, fully prepared, nothing left to chance. I chose option 3. Over the next few weeks, I did things that felt bizarre in the context of my normal daily life. I opened my own bank account at a different bank and started moving portions of my savings over slowly. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would flag, just a steady, quiet shift. I had my own money, my own savings. I was not taking anything that was not mine. But I needed it separated, and I needed it somewhere he could not see. I talked to a friend of mine who had gone through a lease situation the year before and asked her casually how she had handled getting her name off an apartment contract. I framed it as asking for someone else. She gave me enough information to understand my options. I started looking at apartments on my lunch break, alone, using my personal phone. I was still going home every night. Still making dinner some nights, still watching television, still sleeping in the same bed. And every single day I went to work and sat 2 desks away from Priya and had normal conversations and sometimes even laughed genuinely because she is actually funny. And that was maybe the strangest part of all of it. I was not performing. Or I was, but it did not feel like performing anymore. It felt more like watching everything from a slight distance, like I had stepped just slightly outside of my own life and was observing it clearly for the first time. Then something happened that I had not planned for. Priya told me she was thinking about leaving the company. She said it casually over lunch, the way you say things you are still turning over, not fully decided. She said she had been feeling like maybe it was time for something new, a change of scene. She looked at her salad when she said it and not at me. I asked her what was driving it. She said sometimes you just feel like your life needs to move in a new direction. I nodded and told her I understood completely. But I understood more than she thought I did. Because 2 days earlier, I had seen a notification on the shared calendar app that Daniel had not realized I could still access. He had started looking at apartments too, in a different neighborhood. 1 apartment for 2 people. He was planning to leave me, not with a conversation, not with honesty. He was going to wait until he had everything arranged, and then he was going to present me with a fait accompli, already moved on, already gone. I sat across from Priya and I watched her talk about new beginnings, and I felt something clarify inside me completely. I was going to move first, and the way I did it was something neither of them would ever fully recover from. I found the apartment on a Thursday. It was small, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building about 20 minutes from where I was living. It had good light and a working elevator, and the landlord was a woman in her 60s who reminded me of my aunt. I signed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon, and I sat in my car afterward and felt something I had not felt in months. Relief. I gave myself 3 weeks. 3 weeks to move things slowly, to transfer what was mine, to have everything in place before I said a word. I was meticulous about it. I moved boxes gradually, a few things at a time, framing it to myself as decluttering, sending things to a storage unit I had rented in cash, the kind of small organizational project that a live-in partner might not notice right away if they were distracted enough. And Daniel was distracted. He was busy with his own plans. I kept working alongside Priya. I kept being normal. I think about that period now and it seems almost impossible that I managed it, but I did. I showed up every day and I was professional and collegial, and sometimes I got her a coffee without being asked, because that is who I am, and I was not going to let this situation make me someone small and petty before I was ready. My last week in the apartment I started on a Sunday. Daniel was out. He said he was seeing a friend, and I did not bother checking because I was too busy. I moved the rest of my personal things. I took my grandmother's dishes that I had brought to the apartment 2 years ago. I took the print that had been in my family for years that I had hung above the couch when we first moved in. I took everything that was mine and only mine, and I left everything we had bought together completely untouched. I left his key on the counter. I did not leave a note. I had thought about it, gone back and forth, written 3 different versions. But in the end, I left nothing. Because I did not owe him an explanation. He had not offered me one. He had been quietly arranging his exit, and now I had arranged mine, only faster. I spent that night in my new apartment sitting on the floor because my furniture was arriving the next day, and I ordered delivery and ate it out of the bag, and it was one of the better meals I have had in a long time. Monday I went to work. Priya was already at her desk when I arrived. She looked at me and said good morning, and I said good morning back, and I sat down and started my day. At 11 she got a phone call. I was not watching her, I was working, but I heard the shift in her voice. The way it dropped slightly, and then she said she had to step away. She went into the hallway. She was gone for about 15 minutes. When she came back, she sat down and she was very still for a moment. I did not look up from my screen. At lunch, she did not ask if I wanted to go. I did not ask her either. We both sat at our desks. By Wednesday, the energy between us had changed in a way that required no explanation on my part. He had finally gone home to an empty apartment and an absent key, and he had called her. And she had begun to understand what she had been part of and what it had cost. I have thought about whether I felt satisfaction in those moments, and the honest answer is that it was not exactly satisfaction. It was more like equilibrium returning, like the ground leveling back out under my feet after a long time of standing at an angle and pretending it was fine. I never confronted her at work. I never confronted him at all. But what happened when he finally reached out to me was something I had spent weeks preparing for, and I was more than ready. He texted first. Of course he did. It was Wednesday evening, and I was in my new apartment assembling a bookshelf, and my phone buzzed on the floor next to me, and I looked at the screen and saw his name, and I felt nothing dramatic. Just a kind of steadiness. I set down the Allen key and I read the message. It said, "Where are you?" And then a few minutes later, it said, "Please call me." And then a few minutes after that, it said, "I came home and your things are gone. What is happening?" I put my phone face down and finished the bookshelf. I let 2 full days pass before I responded. I know some people would say that was cruel, but I had sat for weeks inside a cruelty that he had been perfectly comfortable maintaining, and I did not feel that I owed him a rapid response. On Friday evening, I sent one message. It said, "I know everything. I moved out. Please do not contact me again." He called 11 times that night. I did not answer. He sent a long message that I read once and then archived. It was the kind of message that people write when they are panicking, full of explanations that are not really explanations and apologies that are centered on how bad he felt, and a lot of language about how it was complicated. I did not respond. The next message came 2 days later and the tone had shifted. Less panic, more calculation. He wanted to talk about the apartment, about logistics, about things we needed to sort out. That I responded to briefly because there were in fact practical things to handle, and I handled them cleanly through a combination of texts and one phone call that I kept to under 10 minutes and entirely logistical. He tried twice during that call to move it toward something personal. I redirected both times. He said my name at one point the way people say your name when they want you to feel something. I said I had to go and ended the call. At work, things with Priya had quietly fallen apart. She had not said anything to me, and I had not said anything to her, but we had stopped having lunch and we had stopped chatting between tasks, and the warmth that had been there was simply gone. I think she knew. I think she had figured out that I had known for a while and had said nothing and had simply left. And I think that unsettled her more than a confrontation would have. A confrontation would have given her something to respond to. My silence gave her nothing. About 3 weeks after I moved out, she put in her notice. She told the team she had another opportunity. She did not look at me when she said it. I said congratulations along with everyone else, and I meant it in a way that surprised me. I genuinely wished her gone, and that felt like a kind of closure. Daniel reached out one more time about a month later. It was not a text. It was an email. He had clearly written it carefully. The kind of email you draft and redraft before sending. It acknowledged that he had hurt me. It said he had ended things with her. It said he missed me and that he had been stupid and that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but that he needed me to know he was sorry. I read it twice. I thought about the 4 years, about the kitchen table we had picked out, about the way he had kissed my forehead every night and I had not known what else he was doing with that same day, about the year of lunches where I had talked about him to her and she had listened and known. I did not write back, not because I did not have things to say. I had so many things to say, but I had made a decision a long time ago, back at that kitchen table with my cup of tea, that I was not going to spend my energy on a conversation that would not give me anything I actually needed. I needed to be out. I was out. I needed my own space. I had it. I needed to stop pretending everything was fine. That chapter was closed. But what I had not expected was what happened 6 weeks later, and it changed the way I thought about all of it. 6 weeks after Daniel's email, a mutual friend of ours, a woman named Claire, who had known us both since before we were a couple, asked me to get coffee. I said yes because I liked Claire and because enough time had passed that I felt like I could sit across from someone who had known us together without it wrecking me. We met on a Saturday morning at a place near her apartment. She hugged me when she saw me and I could tell she had been thinking about what to say. We talked about easy things first, her work, my new apartment, a trip she was planning. And then she looked at her cup and said she wanted to tell me something because she thought I deserved to know. She told me that Priya had not left the company for another opportunity. She had left because she and Daniel had broken up 2 weeks after I moved out. He had told Priya, apparently, that he was going to end things with me and be with her properly. That had been the plan, the apartment he had been looking at, the new beginning they were supposedly building. But when I disappeared before he could execute that plan, it had done something to him. Claire said he had described it to a mutual friend as feeling like the ground had dropped out. He had not moved into that apartment. He had stayed in ours. He had ended things with Priya from the same couch we had watched television on together for 4 years. I sat with that information for a moment. I wanted to be honest about how I felt. Part of me felt something. I am human. 4 years is 4 years, and it would be dishonest to say there was no part of me that registered what Claire was telling me as meaningful. But the feeling was small and far away, like something happening in a room at the end of a long hallway. I asked Claire how she knew all of this. She said Daniel had called her a few weeks ago, upset, wanting to talk to someone who knew both of us. She said she had mostly listened. She said she was not telling me because she thought I should do anything with the information, just because she felt like I had been the person in this situation who had the least amount of information for the longest amount of time, and that had not been fair. I told her she was right and that I appreciated her saying so. We finished our coffee and talked for another hour about completely unrelated things, and it was one of the more normal and pleasant mornings I had spent in recent memory. I walked home. It was a nice day, the kind where the light is doing something good and you can feel the season shifting. I stopped at the farmer's market 2 blocks from my apartment and bought some things I did not strictly need and carried them home in a paper bag. I put everything away in my kitchen, my small kitchen in my own apartment that I had chosen and signed for, and moved into entirely on my own terms, and I stood at my window for a while. Here's what I know now that I did not fully know a year ago. The end of something real does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it comes in quietly, a wrong forwarded email, a name appearing too many times in a phone log, a note in a calendar that was not meant for you. And the way you respond to it says more about who you are than anything that was done to you. I responded by going quiet, by thinking before I acted, by refusing to be a scene in someone else's story and instead writing my own. I do not spend a lot of time thinking about Daniel, less than you might expect. I think about my grandmother's dishes in my kitchen cabinet. I think about the light in my apartment in the mornings. I think about the fact that I learned something important about what I will and will not accept, and I carry that knowledge forward. Priya, I think about sometimes. Not with warmth, but not with hatred either. With something more like distance. She made choices. So did he. So did I. Mine turned out better for me than theirs did for them. And that honestly is enough.